Welcome to the lair. Today we're building Shadowdark hazards, which are environmental threats that you can use to challenge your players. Our inspiration is my lunchtime game. The adventurers are trekking through a dense Scandinavian forest on their way to the trade town of Vården. It's the very depth of winter, which means the days are short and the world is very, very cold, and naturally, hazards lurk around every turn of the frozen, snow-covered trail. On this episode, we're going to be using our Shadowdark hazards chart, which we talked about in our Shadowdark Hazards 101 episode and is available on our website. But to briefly recap, the core rulebook for Shadowdark talks about three kinds of different hazards. Movement, so things that slow or stop your movement. Damage, which is ongoing damage the characters suffer when exposed to the hazard. And then weaken, something that saps their physical capabilities, their mental grit, or just resources, like uses up torches, that kind of thing. Our chart extrapolates from published adventures, and it takes you from hazard level 0 to 10, offering suggested damage for the various levels, as well as difficulty classes for evading the threat. You can use some of it, you can use all of it. Not all hazards are going to end up having some sort of a check or damage, but if they do, our chart may help you. My campaign is called Mörka Norden, and it's basically a iteration or an alternative version of Norse Northlands kind of thing. And so, as we're talking through our Arctic hazards, some inspiration. Obviously, the Empire Strikes Back, Hoth, ice caves, wampas. You're about to freeze to death, so you have to cut open your tauntaun to stay alive. And then, honestly, one of my favorite films of all time, The Thing, taking place in Antarctica. Long, dark nights, horrible things in the darkness, and, the Antarctica is actively trying to kill you, right? So that's some of our inspiration. To start off, I've got the threat that I've actually thrown at my PCs like right now, which is snow-covered crevasses, which I think I may have taken from the Thing prequel. There's a scene in the Thing prequel where they're driving their like wildcat across the frozen wasteland of Antarctica, and then the ice gives out beneath them, and the whole thing just collapsed down into the crevasse. Right, this is like the beginning point of them figuring out that there's horrible things lurking in the ice, and so the idea here is you've got a thin crust of snow that conceals a deep crack in the ice. How I approached this was to set DC 12 dex check when you walk onto the ice. And if you fail, you fall through the ice, plummeting into the crevasse. Exactly how much damage you take depends on how deep you made the crevasse. So if you want to be kind of kindler, gentler, you might assume a 10-foot drop and they take a D6, right? But if it's a 50-foot drop, maybe more substantial damage, right? Or you might have you fall into the crevasse. Can you make another dex check to grab onto something and not fall farther? But I'm mindful that like Shadowdark isn't constantly forcing you to make checks, right? So if they just say, hey, I reach out and grab something, can I stop my fall?
And I would say the thing that makes this different from a trap is the foreshadowing of it. They know that it's there. They know that with the thin crust of ice, you can probably, yes, it says conceal. You said conceals, but they should know that something dangerous is here, so they should be moving carefully.
Yeah, and so how I handled that was they approach, so the forest is very dense, and they've approached an open field, which is in and of itself unique, right? Because there aren't a lot of open fields in the forest. And they hear the sounds of someone screaming out for help, crying out for help. And so as they approach, they realize that they find the crevasse and the guy calling up, and he's fallen down into it, and he's broken his leg, and he had fled an attack on his caravan, and everybody else was killed by the ratmen. And so, he's begging for help. And in my campaign, that alerted them to the fact that there is at least this one crevasse. What they don't know is that the rest of the field there's more crevasses out there. I think it's one of those things where I think I like to give PCs the opportunity. So you've come across this big open field that's a little bit suspicious. So what else can you? Maybe it's shaded a little blue because the ice is thinner. I think with this particular threat in the real world, yeah, you're not going to know it's there. You just like fall through it. But I think that's where maybe the first crevasse is a little less lethal, and now it's there, and then maybe subsequent ones could be a little bit more dangerous because now we've told you.
Yeah. And an alternate version of this is they're not snow covered. The crevasses are actually there, but they're too far to jump or jump safely. That would be more of a movement one where they'd have to figure out how to get across it.
Right.
With the penalty of a damage if they don't get across it well, but that's where you get into the people traversing glaciers, where they'll put a ladder down and then they'll walk across that ladder.
Which in my campaign, we had this whole 15-minute digression about 10-foot poles because the goblin the goblin wizard has a 10-foot pole. He's like, why would I have a 10-foot pole? This is an unreasonably large pole. Imagine just walking through the world with a 10-foot pole, especially if you're the goblin. Who has a 10-foot pole? 6-foot pole I could see, right? That's more like a staff, but 10 foot, like, I don't know. It's a trope of the genre. Like, there's always 10-foot poles, but it's like, it's a good point.
It was a 10-foot square back then. You know?
Right. So, I don't know. Now you've got these crevasses and you have a 10-foot pole. Maybe that's what you use your 10-foot pole for. It's like this. He was just like, it is hilarious. He was just riffing on it. It's like, this is an entirely unreasonable piece of dungeoneering equipment. Who the hell would
Wait
carry
till
a 10-foot
he realizes
pole?
He can use it as a pole vault and get over the crevasse.
Well, right. So now he's got this field of crevasses and suddenly, hey, maybe the pole will be something. So I think, or that maybe the pole will be helpful. Some other things to think about for the crevasses to kind of complicate matters. So first, what has fallen in there before? In my campaign, it was this guard because I wanted to call out and have this role-playing encounter, but it could be a monster. A very hungry, desperate monster. And when they're pausing to get either their fellow adventurer out of the hole or the person that fell in the hole before them, what attacks? In my campaign, I've got a yearling owl bear that it just had a kill further out in the field and has just noticed them and started to approach. And now they got into this whole thing where they were putting on threat displays to try to drive off the owl bear so it doesn't come too close. The owl bear, too, I had it very purposefully. It knows where the crevasses are because it has its animal senses. And so it purposely went around a crevasse on the map, which again kind of foreshadows the fact that there is something else here. I think, goblins or other threats that are kind of off on the side with bows they're resting up on a little hill because they know things are going to come and fall in there, right? You've got any number of options, I think, to threaten your PC.
Yeah, combining a hazard with a trap at that point.
Exactly. Because I think that makes it more like the hazard itself can be a challenge to be overcome, but I think players can debate for too long sometimes. So I think if you're finding that, look on your random encounter chart or just have the plan B of like, you hear the howling of wolves in the distance.
With the field of crevasses, it has the risk of turning into something tedious where if they have to go through the same repetition or it just gets glossed over after the first one, you've got to make it so the hazard actually means something. So it's actually a hazard rather than just a speed bump in the game.
And they can always choose to go around, right? So that's the other thing. Like, just like in, the Lord of the Rings, you head into the mountain passes and the storm is too much. It's too much for the hobbits. They can't do it. You have to turn around. So it could be, this is just obviously a killing field. We're going to take the half day to go around the field, or we're just going to go some other direction to try and avoid this particular threat, which I think is entirely appropriate. Sometimes we all get locked into, there's a threat. I must solve it.
Right.
Further complicating things for my game is that they because you can only carry so much gear in Shadowdark, and because they are going to Vården to sell stuff, they bought a sled and a reindeer. And when they were getting the guy out of the crevasse, the reindeer heard the owl bear and was like, well, I don't know, I want to mess with an owl bear. And no one was tending to the reindeer. So just starts to go away. So now the owl bear is coming to attack them. The reindeer and their sled full of all their stuff is starting to move that away. And they're trying to get a guy with a broken leg out of a pit.
Nice.
Yeah.
Speaking of reindeer, we have another northern hazard here, which is you've seen similar things in movies and such. The best GM steal is stampeding herd of reindeer. So you have this distant thunder that becomes this, ends up becoming this wall of fur and muscle as a stampeding herd of reindeer trample through the adventurer's camp. We have it as like a DC wisdom or intelligence to notice what that threat is that's approaching and be able to rouse the others in time. And then you have a couple of rounds, maybe a D3 rounds to get to safety. And if you're in it, there's a DC 12 dex check to evade the trampling herd. And woe be to anyone who is not able to, as they take 2d6 damage as they're run over by these stampeding reindeer. And of course, reindeer don't stampede for no reason. So what spooked them in the first place? Was it a pack of owlbears? I don't know if owlbears travel in packs, but you don't want whatever is spooking the reindeer to catch up to you. I would say as a GM, you could either take pity on the party or really ratchet things up for the party, depending upon how well they survived the stampeding herd of reindeer, and either have the howls off in the distance to let them know the threat is there, or have the threat show up immediately after. Basically, you have that option at that point, is to, because you could definitely TPK a party after a stampeding herd of reindeer, and then snow apes or wolves or whatever suddenly show up afterward.
Yeah, so I think I do have to say, when I was coming up with these hazards, I was thinking back to like my wilderness training for scouts and what have you. And part of when you establish a camp is thinking about, what signs there are. What you're looking for possible threats. So you don't want to camp next to water because it might rise very quickly and drown you. You're camping beneath trees, you want to look for dead branches so that they're not going to fall and crush you in the night. And so if you're on what appears to be a game trail, maybe you shouldn't be on the game trail because things go through the game trail. That's another one of those ways of kind of foreshadowing the threat. What I like about this scenario is it's not just, in the middle of the day. They've set up for camp. It's a possibility for a random encounter, but it's not just, a snow leopard comes out of the darkness, right? It's something a little different than they may have experienced before. And I like the idea of like the things chasing them, where like I can see them running up into the trees and then the wolves come, and now the wolves are just hanging out at the bottom of the trees whining at them. Or you've got something that can climb trees, or you've got something that can set the tree on fire. Again, kind of going back to like the Hobbit, when the orcs chase, it's the orcs, right? They chase the dwarves into the trees, and like they have to climb the trees, and the orcs are setting the trees on fire, and then I guess the eagles come and rescue them, if I remember correctly. So it's
been a while since I've seen it.
It's been a while since I read or seen, but like it's setting up that sort of compounded threat where it's like out of the frying pan into the fire sort of situation. So I will say I did run something like this for I read a Stargate game, and they traveled through the Stargate. They came out and it was a prehistoric planet, and so they heard the sound of distant thunder, but it was dinosaurs. It was a herd of brontosauruses coming through, and then like it's being chased by some sort of like super triceratops, or maybe T-Rex, right? Triceratops probably chase them, and then like all of a sudden it's like, oh my god, stampeding dinosaurs. I'm like, wait, is that thing gonna try and eat us? And then because it's Stargate, you have guns, right? It's like, do we try and kill the dinosaur? Do we run from the dinosaur? So moving on, freezing fog. So this would be something that would impact movement. The first two that we talked about were more kind of damage oriented. With freezing fog, a chill mist fills the forest, soaking your clothing, sapping your strength. DC 12 con each hour, or your overland pace is slowed by half. So you're not taking damage necessarily, but it's really kind of wearing you down, and it may start to impact your rations and some other things. Having been soaking wet and cold in the wilderness, it sucks. You don't want to do it. And so I think if you're looking for a way of kind of reinforcing the threat of the terrain and the environment itself, this would be a cool way to approach that. I think it also sets up other things. What's lurking in the mists, taking advantage of that fog, ready to attack them or confuse them. What's causing the fog? Is it natural? Is it a magical curse? But you do have these things. Fog is going to happen when there's a temperature differential. Like, so you're still going to get fog in Scandinavian North, right? But it's not always a natural fog. And then you were talking about blinding fog, which I think is particularly insidious, especially at night, right?
Yeah. Fog in general, adding a light source to it does not make it easier to see through.
It makes everything worse.
It makes everything just a little bit worse because it's just reflecting all that light back at you and making everything more impenetrable. You might feel better having the light with you, but not being able to see more than 5 feet in front of you is its own hazard. So, yeah.
Yeah, and this actually kind of harkens back to our episode talking about torchlight radius, right? How much does a torch illuminate? And in that episode, we did talk about being able to constrain the light source is itself a threat. And so if you're used to only being able to see out to near, but you can only see out to 15 feet or 5 feet, that's going to feel very claustrophobic. And,
yes,
and the PC should be worried. But
yes,
that's okay. They have a 10-foot pole.
Right. 10-foot poles, they're classic. Can't go wrong with them unless you try and turn a corner in a tight hallway. Then there's
What do you mean you're stuck?
There's the ever-present hazard that is in all Arctic conditions, which a lot of people don't really think about, especially in today's day and age with high-tech cold weather gear, but hypothermia.
Yes.
Yes, it will weaken you. It will confuse you as you sleep overnight. All of that warmth that you would normally acquire by just moving around is just going to go away. Especially if you don't have a fire nearby or some other way to keep warm and dry. The wetter you are, the faster you're going to get hypothermia. Something like a DC 12 con check or become confused, because it's one of the symptoms of hypothermia there. All checks suddenly become at disadvantage. And then every hour, if you're traveling through the wilderness, a DC 15 like int check to avoid becoming lost because of your confusion. And the longer you are in the cold, this kind of a sub hazard within this hazard, which is frostbite. DC 12 con check to avoid frostbite or start taking damage. And I almost want to not let the players know how much damage they took.
Right.
And this is kind of insidious, is just, it's like, oh, you see that your fingers are turning darker, or a black color or bluish color. And then you roll some damage behind the screen or privately. And it's like, and they're like, what was that? How much damage was that? It's like, you don't know because you're not feeling it.
Yeah. I think this is a hazard you could do just as you were describing it, right? So this is like the mechanical route. But the thing about hypothermia is it is insidious, as you were saying. And so you don't know when you're becoming hypothermic because it impedes your reasoning, and you start doing dumb things. This is why people like, oh, I'm so hot, and then they take off their jackets when they should be like bundling up or trying to move more, right? And they just make poor judgment calls because
getting
they're impeded.
Confused signals. Yeah.
Right. And your extremities are starting to lose circulation because your body is trying to protect its core. And so I've been in these situations. I thankfully have never had to deal with frostbite, but I have seen people who are on the cusp of hypothermia after we camped out in 0-degree temperatures. And you wake up and you start moving around and like you're a little, you're confused. Words are a little slurred. And so you could do this whole encounter where you don't have to roll a die, but you're just describing what's happening to them. And then maybe at the inflection point, suddenly they're like, someone's like, well, wait a minute. What do you mean we've seen this tree for the third time? Or what have you? Okay, make a wisdom check, because now you're suddenly realizing, oh my gosh, we're slowly freezing to death. It's super dangerous. And again, like that's why when you're training for like wilderness first aid and what have you, the key thing is like other people paying attention to what other people are doing, because you're never going to notice it
Not just yourself.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I got to say, when I was in Philmont this past time, the second coldest I've ever been on a camp out is when we camped next to a river, and we were in a safe space, but it was 30 something degrees overnight, and the humidity was very high because of the brook / river. And the humidity and the cold just got into me. Like, so I had to get out, put up an additional layers, right? I was just freezing and shivering. Like, okay, this is miserable.
Yeah. I mean, humidity itself can be a boon or a bane, depending upon, the situation you're in. One of the reasons why in the winter you have to humidify your house is because it is so dry in the air. You can heat the air, but that heat is not going to transfer to your body as efficiently as if there's something to conduct it, which is the humidity. It's why people in Arizona don't go into the swimming pool until it's over 100 degrees out, because it's when you get out of the pool, all of that water just flashes off and you're suddenly cold because there's no water in the air. And so they have to wait until it's warmer before they actually get in, even though 100 degrees here in Indiana or wherever you are is really, really hot because of the humidity there. So yeah, that hypothermia plus, cold weather plus humidity equals faster hypothermia.
Yeah. If people like our hazards conversations, maybe we'll do one about, the opposite, which is hot, because humidity and heat can kill you just as well as hypothermia can. But we're still in the Arctic North, so that might be more of a desert theme.
Yeah. The universe is a lot of different ways to kill you.
Yes.
So it's a miracle.
Yeah, so I think all of these in particular, like the fog and the hypothermia, it'd be good opportunities to reinforce the lethality of the thing that you're doing, and the fact that you're out on your own, far from civilization, and maybe you have 3 more days. And so for both these, both for the mists and this hypothermia situation, do you risk starting a fire? Do you, and if it's really humid, it might be hard to start a fire. So you might need to use your torches. Like, yeah, sure, there's wood everywhere, but you can't just start a fire. So do you risk using your torches to get a fire going? And then what's going to come to the fire? Thanks for watching part 1 of our Shadowdark Hazards episode. Part 2 continues our treacherous brainstorming with 1d4 threats that players can find underground. What hazards have you encountered while adventuring in Shadowdark or other fantasy RPGs? Is there a particular type of hazard you'd like us to talk about next? Let us know by leaving a comment or emailing us at podcast@lairsecrets.com.